before there is a cancer, as we understand cancer, as modern science understands cancer, which is like a big chunk of cells that are genetically morphed into some kind of shit, right? There's, at the very onset, a trigger. In that trigger, let's say that trigger is a mind state, because it is. And within that trigger, the full expression exists. So if you now would go into the micro, right? Because now there's no cancer, there's just a mind state, and the mind state establishes itself. Right? It's a mind state. So if now the mind state, if you could read the mind state, it tells you it's objective. Now, this is the, let's say, a causal perspective. Now, it hasn't manifested. It has to go down into the plane of manifestation through your body in time here, this version of time, in the physical plane, express itself. And let's say you would go in the micro and you would just follow the story. There's no cancer yet. There's so much chemical equations that need to come to pass, express themselves and establish themselves. Imagine each one of those actions there's a narrative. Yeah, but what's pushing the narrative forward? Is it now that the molecule is deciding to do this? And if the molecule could speak, what would it say? And then now, let's say there's a cell, and the cell, let's pretend that cancer is what they say it is, right? Because this is another conversation we'll have definitely at another point in time. So now the cell, there's a change in the DNA. Well, if you could speak to it, what would it say? Does it know what's going on? I'm sure some of them would know what's going on. I mean, at least at a very small level. Let's say they would speak. Well, they would start to describe their process and why they're doing this. And in their mind, because the mind state that generates cancer is not evil, it's intelligent. And in fact, as far as cancer is concerned, but you don't understand that because nobody taught you that, it's there to save you. Now that's the truth. You think cancer is a disease. Cancer is not a disease, it's a symptom. It's an intelligent symptom created by the intelligent body in order to save you. But you don't understand that, right? So if you now would speak, because for you it's evil because it kills you. It doesn't kill you, you're dying. And you don't know what you're dying from, and you don't know what that so-called cancer is protecting you from because you have no idea what's really chasing you. It's called death, but you don't understand that. It's just a concept. So if you would speak now to the organisms that are expressing or moving or adjusting themselves according to the will of that mind state which is going to establish cancer in a couple of years, what are they going to tell you? Are they going to tell you they're evil? Or are they going to tell you they're doing something intelligent? And what they're doing is necessary. It is the most important thing that's ever been done. And if they don't succeed at doing this, it will be the end. What are they going to tell you? And if you now followed its action process, if you would speak with those, would most of the cells or most of the molecules know what the fuck is going on? No, they wouldn't. They would know what they need to do. I need to go from here to there. They will be able to tell you, I'm going from here to there. And the next one, I'm doing this and this. And maybe this one has a macro vision, meaning it contains that floor and that floor. So it has a sense of this. And maybe there's one who has a greater perspective and a greater perspective. And maybe there's priests of that mind state. The ones who manage the overall picture. That means they're able to tune into that mind state, which is a power, right? It's a deity of some sort. Let's call it Lucifer for the sake of conversation, but it's clearly not the same Lucifer as you have. But let's say it's a Luciferian power, that mind state. And what would it say? Well, it would help them perceive the plan as far as they're able to see. Because how would you, when you were 2,500 years ago, imagine life 2,500 years after? It's impossible to imagine, nor do you need to. But what you need to understand is that you're riding an intelligence, and you need to now fulfill this and that, and you will be receiving the inspiration. Your mind will be told what to do, and you will draw towards yourself the geeks with their so-called science, which will be infused in them so that they have the intelligence to be able to create the appropriate technology at that right moment to take it one step further. They told you that. They've been telling you this for thousands of years. Science comes from the gods with a small g. It doesn't come from you. You're a monkey. What the fuck do you know? It's given to you by so-called deities or so-called gods. It's been told to you since the beginning of mythology, since forever. But this is something you don't totally understand because you don't understand the process by which those so-called gods can come in communion with you. Through your so-called mind, which is their tool. So, all this to say, so to whatever degree, there's a knowing. But how can the person imagine what's going to happen in 5,000 years? They couldn't imagine it, right? Because it's beyond their capacity to foresee it, unless they're one of those very exceptional people that have visions. But even if they had vision, they wouldn't understand what they see because it's so far away, right? Like as we imagine what's happening in 20,000 years, how could we imagine it unless it goes back to being a jungle, right? You couldn't understand. Just like if you told your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather that one day you're talking on the telephone, it's a cell phone, it's invisible and it's in your brain, nobody would understand, right? So, do they know? Well, there's different levels of knowing, but depending on how much they can commune with that so-called intelligence. But for the rest, they're just there fulfilling their function. And remember, let's continue to pretend that the so-called cancer, as the medical sciences are saying, is that, well, if there's cancer establishing itself, the whole body is now subject to the cancer. The little cancer, which can be a little thing, will destroy the entire body. So that means the body is now subject to the cancer. It is the God now. If you understand what I'm trying to say in regards to our analogy, which is, well, I'm not sure exactly how you worded it at the start, but these so-called horrible people, the so-called elites, oligarchs, whatever the fuck you want to call them, and their so-called plan, and when did it start? I'm like, it started at the start. In the Garden of Eden, the story begins. We've said it before, the Adam and Eve story, and then there's a rift. That rift is Lucifer. That rift is Lucifer, and Lucifer is a mind. It's a state of mind. And from that point on, it's happening. And we've discussed this before in multiple different episodes. And from that moment where the perfect equilibrium is broken, so from that moment on, the human being is literally is dying. In the so-called Garden of Eden, there is no death. And as the so-called God, there's a lot of so-calls today. It's a so-called day. Today, what am I going to say? The so-called God of the Old Testament, the so-called God of the Garden of Eden is saying to his creation, it's like, don't eat that fruit because you're going to die. Well, literally, remember, this can be understood in so many ways. I'm using it to communicate what I want to communicate, right? Let's not be geeky about this. So he's saying you're going to die. What was that? Why? Because you're going to get off the current. You're going to get off of the current. And the moment you get off the current, that's it. But the moment you get off the current, something is awakened. The so-called intellect is awakened because the intellect's job is to solve problems. But its problem now is not how do I get from here to there. Its problem is how do we conquer death, because now we're confronted death, whereas our original state, there is no death. So the real awakening of the intellect is based on the need to solve the problem of death. And to solve the problem of death as far as the intellect is controlled, because remember, the intellect is an idiot. It's a robot. We need to conquer nature. So technically it's not so stupid because it's right on point. So how am I going to conquer nature in order to solve the problem of death? So that's what so-called intellect is for. And that's why we say Luciferians are great intellectuals, because Lucifer is the bearer of light. Which fucking light if God is light? So it's the illuminating your so-called intellect. Well, it's not the so-called intellect on this one. It's the intellect. So the point is, it starts there. And that's why that story is so important. Because it's, how do you explain the unexplainable? You give it the story that allows you to kind of like, okay, there's something that breaks. And that's why I say, but wait a minute, that's how God designed it. The supreme intelligence at the base of the entire creation designed it this way, because had He not designed it that way, well, there would be no quote-unquote evolution. There would be nothing going on. We'd just be in the Garden of Eden doing nothing, because there's nothing happening. Because everything is perfect. It's the state of perfect balance. We need to create unbalance so that unbalance can rebalance itself. And the process of creating chaos, we go towards chaos, so that chaos can resolve itself, is the process by which creativity, as we understand it, is born. If there's harmony, perfect harmony, nothing is born. You don't need anything. You don't need water. You don't need to eat. You don't need anything. You're in a perfected state. So there's no action. There is no activity. So if there's no action and no activity, there's no creativity. If there's no creativity, there's nothing that comes to life besides what's originally there. And what's originally there is just holding down equipoise, balance. So we need to create disbalance. And the process of disbalance, it's not just instantly it's disbalance. It's like you hit a gong. Boom. First, the vibration is small and it goes woo, then it reaches a peak. Is this correct? That's right. This is my homeboy over there, his music dude. I don't want to insult him, you know how geeks get. Well, so it vibrates, gets to a peak, and then it goes back down and finds its balanced state, which is no noise, silence. So we hit the sound, so we go through a journey in time where we have to go from a state of balance to a slowly chaos. It's not really chaos, is it? But let's call it chaos for the sake of conversation. And then that needs to resolve itself. So I don't like this map. It's like this for me. Literally like a circuit in a battery. You go from the positive power, perfect harmony, to negative power, which is perfect disharmony, but it's not disharmony. But from positive power's point of view, it's perfect disharmony, which is perfect creative potential, expressed creative potential. So we go there, but now what's the impetus to go towards there? There's no impetus unless there's something here that's severed. You need to get out of this perfect state. And this must be by design, otherwise there would be no reason to go towards negative power. And there would be no reason to, what's moving, what's creating the currency. Remember, this is like a big electricity grid. Anyways.